Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. The Harry Potter universe is truly amazing, yet at the same time, it is full of contradictions. On one hand, it's a world full of magic, wonders, and thrilling adventures, but on the other hand, with each new plot twist, more questions arise and logic is often put at risk. One of the most prominent examples of these questions is the Ministry of Magic and its approach to controlling the magical world. Why didn't the magical government intervene in matters that clearly needed strict control? Let's explore. Number 1. Love potions. One of the most disturbing aspects of the magical world is the careless attitude toward love potions. In Half-Blood Prince, we learn that such potions can not only be brewed, but also sold. But how does the Ministry of Magic react? Absolutely nothing. We see Voldemort using a love potion on his father, and later Ron, under its influence, falls in love with one of the students. This situation raises alarm, but in the wizarding world, it doesn't seem to be a violation of any rules. Number 2. Transfiguration of animals. In Chamber of Secrets, Professor McGonagall teaches second year's transfiguration by turning animals into water goblets. This exercise proves to be quite difficult, and many students fail to do it correctly, only transforming the animals partially. The cruel treatment of animals essentially goes unchecked, which also raises questions. Why is this behavior not regulated in a magical school that trains future wizards? Number 3. Potion brewing and distribution. Potions in the magical world possess incredible power. Some can help, while others can harm. For example, the luck potion or the identity-changing potion. In our world, many substances are regulated by law and can only be dispensed with a prescription to prevent abuse. However, in the magical world, such substances are sold without much restriction. Why doesn't the Ministry of Magic pay attention to this? Number 4. Weasley say wizard wheezes. The Weasley Brothers shop is a place where dangerous items are sold, which can lead to unpredictable consequences. Love potions, instant darkness powder, and other strange things like devices that cause illnesses are all sold without the ministry's intervention. Why isn't the government regulating such dangerous goods, which could not only disrupt the educational process at Hogwarts, but also the everyday lives of muggles? Number 5. Dark magic artifacts. Although the Ministry of Magic tries to control the circulation of dark artifacts, stores like Gorbin and Burke's calmly sell cursed necklaces and other magical items. Muggles seemingly cannot access these items, but why doesn't the Ministry pay attention to this? The control issues are clear. Number 6. Owl Post. Owl Post is the main means of communication in the magical world. However, this method is not only extremely inconvenient, but also lacks proper security. In Order of the Phoenix, Dolores Umbridge easily intercepts a letter from Harry, which in turn puts the confidentiality and safety of wizards at risk. Why hasn't the Ministry created more secure communication channels to ensure the safety of information? Number 7. Flying on brooms. Flying on brooms is not only a way of transportation, but also part of sporting events like Quidditch. However, brooms can be flown at any age without the need to pass exams. Unlike apparition, which requires strict rules, and the use of flue powder, broomstick travel is not controlled in any way. Why hasn't the Ministry set any limitations on this method of movement, which could be used to break the law or for other criminal activities? Number 8. Unregistered animagi. One of the most dangerous and mysterious abilities in the magical world is the power to become an animagus, a wizard who can transform into an animal at will. The Ministry of Magic requires that animagi be registered, yet it seems they do little to actually control or monitor this process. The story of the Marauders highlights just how easily this dangerous ability can go unchecked. Sirius Black, James Potter, and Peter Pettigrew transformed into animals for years without anyone noticing. Pettigrew, in his rat form, lived secretly among muggles and wizards, spying on them, and even played a key role in Voldemort's return to power. As stated in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, quote, 2-2. The Ministry's failure to regulate animagi is evident in how the Marauders were able to operate without any intervention. Pettigrew's long years as a rat, living undetected by anyone, including the Ministry, show how easily such powers can be abused. The Ministry was clearly neglectful, allowing these wizards to act freely and outside the law. Sirius Black's fugitive status and the dangers that followed would not have been possible without this lack of oversight. The very existence of unregistered animagi poses a significant risk to the safety and security of both the wizarding and muggle worlds, yet the Ministry allowed this dangerous gap to remain wide open. Number 9. Use of time turners. Time turners, introduced in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, are magical devices that allow wizards to travel through time. These enchanted objects are powerful but come with grave risks. Changing even the smallest event in the past can have unpredictable, often disastrous consequences. Despite this, the Ministry of Magic allows their use by underage wizards such as Hermione Granger, who uses a time turner simply to attend extra lessons. This decision raises serious concerns. The Ministry, supposedly focused on regulating magic, handed over such a dangerous artifact for trivial purposes. Hermione herself is shocked when she realizes how risky using the time turner is, but there is no mention of any Ministry oversight or concern. The consequences of using time turners were clearly underestimated. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, the time turners are destroyed in the battle at the Department of Mysteries, but the fact that the Ministry allowed Hermione to use one for something as insignificant as extra lessons speaks volumes about their lack of caution. The Ministry's careless handling of such a dangerous tool, one that could alter the course of history, demonstrates a profound lack of responsibility. Time, a force that cannot be controlled, was handed to a young witch with little more than a casual instruction. It's a reckless oversight that leaves the fate of the magical world vulnerable. Number 10. Muggle technology integration. The Ministry of Magic has always preached the importance of keeping the magical world hidden from Muggles, yet despite this, Muggle technology and customs have slowly crept into the lives of wizards. The Ministry's supposed commitment to secrecy rings hollow when you consider how easily magical society adopts Muggle inventions. Take Arthur Weasley's flying car, for instance. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Arthur uses a Muggle car enchanted to fly to take his children to school. It's a magical vehicle, but one with all the trappings of Muggle technology. And yet no one seems concerned about the consequences of using such a vehicle so openly. Even more telling is the use of Muggle radios by the Order of the Phoenix in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. The Order uses these devices to transmit secret messages, bypassing the usual magical communication methods. It's as if the Ministry doesn't care that Muggles are inadvertently becoming part of the magical world. Radio signals, while magically encrypted, still expose the wizard's activities to potential Muggle detection. If the Ministry is so intent on protecting the secrecy of magic, Why allow such obvious breaches? This contradiction raises serious questions about the ministry's priorities. If the magic world's secrecy is truly so critical, why does the ministry allow such casual use of Muggle technologies? By permitting the use of enchanted Muggle objects and relying on their technology for covert operations, the ministry not only exposes magical society to risk, but also undermines its own efforts to keep magic hidden. Number 11. House Elf Rights. House elves are one of the most painful contradictions in the magical world. These creatures, with their own intelligence and emotions, are enslaved to wizarding families for centuries. They have no rights, no freedom, and no voice in their own lives. The Ministry of Magic, however, turns a blind eye to their suffering. There are no laws to protect them, no regulations to ensure their well-being. Instead, the exploitation continues unchecked, with no real effort to address the moral issue. Hermione Granger tried to change this in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire through her campaign for the Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare (SPEW). But her efforts were met with mockery, not support. "No one cares about house elves," Ron Weasley tells her in frustration. The ministry showed no interest in her cause, treating it as a quirky hobby rather than a serious social justice movement. To them, the plight of house elves was not worth considering. The ministry's indifference to the issue of slavery, especially in such an advanced magical society, is shocking. The house elves' lives are marked by extreme servitude and cruelty. Take Dobby, for example. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Dobby's loyalty is twisted into a curse. He is forced to serve the Malfoy family, enduring physical abuse and punishment for even the smallest acts of disobedience. Dobby's pain is a reflection of a system that sees magical creatures like him as tools to be used, not beings to be respected. The fact that the ministry does nothing to end such practices speaks volumes about their priorities. Even the Malfoys' treatment of house elves like Kreacher reveals how deeply ingrained the system of slavery is in the wizarding world. Kreacher is constantly mistreated, yet when Harry inherits him in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Kreacher is still bound by his old servitude. Harry reluctantly begins to show Kreacher kindness, but the fact remains, the ministry has allowed this exploitation to continue unchecked. The treatment of house elves is a dark spot in the wizarding world, one that the ministry refuses to address. Their silence only perpetuates the suffering of these creatures. Number 12. Safety at Hogwarts. The Ministry of Magic always claimed that student safety at Hogwarts was its top priority, but the reality tells a different story. Over the course of 7 years at school, Harry and his friends faced countless dangers that would have led any Muggle school to be shut down for gross safety violations. Hogwarts, however, seemed to operate on the belief that courage and quick thinking would always be enough to protect its students. And time again, the ministry failed to take real action. One example stands out: a troll loose in the corridors during Halloween in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. The school was thrown into chaos, and it was left to Harry, Ron, and Hermione to deal with the creature. "There's a troll in the dungeons!" Professor Quirrell screamed. But it was the students who took matters into their own hands, despite having no real training. This wasn't a rare occurrence. Another year, a three-headed dog named Fluffy was guarding a secret passageway to the Philosopher's Stone, and the ministry did nothing to secure the school properly. It was left to students to figure out how to avoid these dangers. the threats escalated in later years. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, a basilisk roamed the halls, and yet there was no ministry intervention. The school was at the mercy of a monster that could petrify students, and it was Harry, once again, who ended up facing it. Later, the Dementors, terrifying creatures of the dark arts, were stationed around the school to protect it from external threats. But they only made the students more vulnerable, especially Harry, who suffered the most. The ministry's response was always too little, too late. Then came the Death Eater attacks during Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. Death Eaters were breaking into Hogwarts, yet the ministry had no real plan to stop them. In fact, the school was left almost defenseless, relying on the professors and students to fend for themselves. Professor McGonagall and others tried their best, but their efforts were not enough. The lack of serious security measures allowed a series of terrifying events to unfold, with the students paying the price for the ministry was negligence. Number 13, magical creatures and their containment. The magical world is teeming with incredible creatures, many of which pose serious dangers, not just to wizards but to muggles as well. Take Aragog, for example, a giant acromantula spider living right near Hogwarts in the Forbidden Forest. The ministry knew about him. They knew about his terrifying size and deadly nature, but they did nothing to control him. They turned a blind eye, hoping the problem would resolve itself. It wasn't until Harry and Ron stumbled into Aragog's lair that the danger became undeniable. The spider, a massive creature, could have easily wiped out anyone who ventured too close, but the ministry chose to ignore the threat until it was too late. Then there are dragons. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, the Triwizard Tournament brought several dragons into Hogwarts. These are creatures of immense power, capable of killing with a single breath of fire. And yet, the ministry's response was chillingly casual. The dragons were brought in without proper precaution. The students, like Harry, were thrown into a dangerous confrontation with the beasts. The Hungarian horntail is a dragon of great ferocity, said Madame Maxime, but it wasn't enough to stop the danger. The ministry allowed these creatures to be used as obstacles in a contest, with no regard for the safety of anyone involved. This lack of regulation is a glaring oversight. Magical creatures like dragons and acromantulas are not simply rare curiosities. They are hazards that demand strict control. The ministry's failure to enforce proper containment and transportation rules puts everyone at risk. They react only when things spiral out of control, as if waiting for the inevitable disaster to occur before taking action. The lack of foresight is evident. The ministry's approach to magical creatures seems reactive rather than proactive. They don't take preventive measures to keep the creatures contained or regulate their transportation properly. It's as though they only respond to danger when it's staring them in the face instead of planning ahead, as shown by the events in Goblet of Fire and the ever-present threat of Aragog. The ministry's neglect of magical creature regulation is a dangerous game, one that puts lives at risk unnecessarily. Number 14, legilimency and occlumency. The use of legilimency and occlumency presents a serious threat to personal privacy and security in the wizarding world. Wizards with the ability to invade others' minds can easily violate boundaries and expose secrets. Surprisingly, despite its dangerous potential, the Ministry of Magic does nothing to regulate these powers. One glaring example is Severus Snape, who used legilimency against Harry Potter without any restrictions. During their occlumency lessons, Snape effortlessly pried into Harry's mind, forcing him to relive painful memories. Harry had no defense, and Snape's harshness only deepened the trauma. Quote 11. Snape sneered during one lesson, showcasing his ability to read Harry's thoughts. But it wasn't just Snape. Lord Voldemort, the darkest wizard of all time, made frequent use of legilimency to control and manipulate those around him. He invaded minds for his own twisted purposes, using fear to control his followers. For example, when he enters Harry's mind, it is a violent intrusion filled with images of death and despair. He doesn't care about boundaries or privacy. His goal is control. "You are mine," Voldemort declares, marking Harry with his influence. This lack of regulation creates a chilling atmosphere where any skilled wizard could easily violate the minds of others. There's no law to stop them. Whether for personal gain, manipulation, or simply out of malice, the power to invade someone's thoughts is unchecked. Harry, a young boy with no real understanding of this power, is forced to face it again and again, while those who wield it show no remorse. This creates a profound imbalance in the world of magic, one that undermines trust. And yet the Ministry of Magic remains silent. They never step in. There is no system in place to prevent such invasions of privacy, no protection for the vulnerable. The Ministry, its indifference to the misuse of legilimency and occlumency, suggests that they either cannot or do not care to control this dangerous ability. For Harry and others like him, this is more than just an invasion. It's a constant threat to their very sense of self. Number 15. Bank security in Gringotts. Gringotts, the Wizarding Bank, is known throughout the magical world as the pinnacle of security. Its vaults are said to be impenetrable, a bastion of safety and trust. For centuries, the gnomes, or goblins, have fiercely guarded the treasures of witches and wizards alike, ensuring their wealth and secrets remain safe from prying eyes. The bank's towering stone structure, located in the heart of Diagon Alley with its deep underground chambers and elaborate enchantments, is often touted as an impenetrable fortress, a symbol of magical supremacy. However, in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, this myth is shattered. The story of how three young teenagers, Harry Potter, Hermione Granger, and Ron Weasley, broke into the bank with little more than clever spells and resourcefulness, raises an important question. If the most secure place in the magical world could be breached by mere children, what does this say about the overall safety of magical financial institutions? The Ministry of Magic, while powerful in many areas, does little to regulate the security of such institutions. The safety of magical assets, it seems, is left entirely in the hands of the goblins who run Gringotts, and this lack of oversight proves to be a significant weakness. Despite being the most trusted protectors of magical wealth, the goblins, as seen during the break-in, are not infallible. They pride themselves on their skills in securing vaults, but as the story unfolds, it becomes apparent that their defenses are not as robust as once believed. This raises a crucial issue. If even a child can bypass such security, how vulnerable are the magical financial systems to more dangerous and malicious forces? The break-in itself is nothing short of daring. Harry, Hermione, and Ron use a combination of stealth, spells, and deception to gain access to the vault. Armed with nothing more than their wits and a few enchanted items, they manage to navigate the vaults, overcoming elaborate magical protections. At one point, they make use of the polyjuice potion to assume the identities of key employees within the bank, an act of clever subterfuge. This is no small feat, especially considering the supposed power of the enchantments guarding the vaults. It highlights how easily a determined group, even without the powerful resources of dark wizards or major criminal syndicates, could infiltrate a facility that is meant to be the epitome of security. The very fact that 3 teenagers who were still learning the full extent of their magical abilities could break into Gringotts demonstrates a fundamental flaw in the way magical security is handled. The magical world, despite its deep roots in tradition and its vast array of advanced spells, has neglected to address the very real threat that breaches in financial security pose. No magical organization, be it the Ministry of Magic or any other, provides adequate regulation of the safety measures in place within Gringotts or any other institution. This oversight becomes glaringly apparent during the break-in, and one is left to wonder what could happen if a more formidable foe such as Lord Voldemort sought to exploit this vulnerability. One of the most striking aspects of the Gringotts security breach is how it reveals the limitations of even the most formidable magical protections. Gringotts vaults are protected by powerful enchantments, including the infamous curse on the Lestrange Vault, which was designed to kill anyone who attempted to access it without permission. Yet despite these formidable obstacles, the trio was able to circumvent them. This speaks to the idea that magic, in all its glory, is not infallible. The break-in demonstrates that even the most sophisticated enchantments can be overcome with enough ingenuity and determination. If children who are barely out of Hogwarts can succeed where others, even adults, might fail, what does this say about the supposed invincibility of magical security? It also reveals a deeper issue of trust. The magical community has long relied on the goblins to safeguard their wealth and possessions, yet the events of the break-in suggest that this trust may be misplaced. The goblins, despite their reputation for being shrewd and meticulous, do not seem to have the means to fend off intruders when it matters most. This is exemplified by the fact that they did not foresee the possibility of a well-planned infiltration, nor did they anticipate the cunning and resourcefulness of the trio. It becomes clear that the goblins, for all their skill in handling money and treasures, lack the foresight and security measures that a truly impenetrable system would require. Furthermore, the break-in exposes another vulnerability, the possibility of inside help. The trio's success in infiltrating Gringotts relied heavily on Hermione, the clever use of the polyjuice potion, allowing them to impersonate employees of the bank. This highlights how easily internal systems can be compromised when the personnel tasked with guarding magical secrets are not thoroughly vetted. It begs the question, what safeguards are in place to ensure that no one within the bank could be tempted to aid dark wizards or thieves in their quest for magical wealth? The failure to prevent such a breach illustrates how the magical world's reliance on individual institutions rather than overarching regulatory frameworks can lead to catastrophic failures. In a world as complex and interconnected as that of magic, the failure to regulate such vital institutions creates a dangerous precedent. The Ministry of Magic's hands-off approach to Gringotts and other magical financial systems leaves the safety of the community in the hands of entities that are not always held accountable for their actions. The goblins, though skilled in their craft, are not immune to corruption or oversight, and this lapse in governance presents a serious threat to the financial security of the entire magical world. Number 16. Personal magical artifacts. In the magical world of Harry Potter, there exists a vast array of powerful magical artifacts, each possessing the potential to change the course of history. These items, ranging from wands to enchanted cloaks, are not only essential tools for witches and wizards, but also dangerous objects that could be misused by those with nefarious intentions. The most prominent question that arises, however, is why the Ministry of Magic, the governing body of the magical community, has never implemented stricter regulations regarding these personal magical artifacts. With the wide availability of such powerful objects, why does the ministry seem to neglect their oversight? Why, for example, did Voldemort's wand, a source of immense power, go unmonitored, and why was Harry Potter allowed to possess and use the invisibility cloak with seemingly no questions asked? The story of Voldemort's wand provides an intriguing entry point. The wand, once in the hands of the infamous dark wizard Gellert Grindelwald, was ultimately passed down to the very person who would become Lord Voldemort. When Voldemort obtained it, he did so by stealing it from the wand maker, Gregorovitch, whose shop had been the last known location of the wand. In the book Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, we learn that this wand was both incredibly rare and powerful, yet there was no record of the theft, nor was there any subsequent effort by the ministry to track or confiscate the wand. The ministry's inability to act in this situation stands in stark contrast to the thorough and invasive oversight it typically applies to more mundane aspects of magical society, such as the regulation of Muggleborns or the control of magical creatures. This oversight failure raises a crucial question. Why does the ministry, despite its bureaucratic vigilance, allow such dangerous objects to remain largely unregulated? The lack of control over personal magical artifacts is not limited to Voldemort's wand. Take, for example, the invisibility cloak which Harry Potter inherited from his father James Potter. The cloak was one of the fabled Deathly Hallows, a set of 3 items tied to an ancient wizarding legend. Despite its extraordinary power, the cloak was not subject to any scrutiny from the ministry. In fact, when Harry used it to sneak around Hogwarts and outwit danger, no one in the ministry seemed to have any knowledge of its existence. Given the cloak as invisibility-enhancing properties, it is remarkable that such a powerful item could exist without any governmental awareness. Were the ministry's officials unaware of the cloak's existence, or were they simply indifferent? Perhaps the ministry failed to understand the true significance of such artifacts, focusing instead on more pressing matters like the control of dark magic and magical creatures. This negligence raises even further concerns when considering the broader spectrum of magical objects. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, we learn about the Mirror of Erised, another artifact of great potential. This enchanted mirror, capable of showing the deepest desires of one's heart, could have been exploited by those with malicious intent, yet the ministry made no attempts to secure it or place any restrictions on its use. Dumbledore, who owned the mirror for a time, had hidden it away in a room at Hogwarts to prevent others from misusing it, yet the ministry's failure to regulate such objects suggests that there is little to no infrastructure in place to track or control dangerous artifacts. It seems that the ministry's regulatory failure is deeply rooted in the assumption that most magical objects are either harmless or used only by those who are already known to be trustworthy. The magical world, in its complexity, often assumes that magical objects fall into the hands of wizards and witches who will use them responsibly. However, the very existence of powerful and dangerous artifacts like the Elder Wand or the Invisibility Cloak should have prompted the Ministry to establish a system of checks and balances, one that ensured such objects were not misused by individuals with dark intentions. The failure to recognize the potential harm these objects could cause allowed Voldemort to amass power and evade detection by the Ministry for years. The Ministry's negligence is not confined to its lack of oversight over artifacts like the Elder Wand or the Invisibility Cloak. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, we see another troubling example in the form of Horcruxes. These dark, magical objects which allow a wizard to split their soul and hide pieces of it in objects to attain immortality were never regulated or even acknowledged by the Ministry until it was far too late. Voldemort's use of Horcruxes, which he created to safeguard his immortality, was a deeply sinister use of magic that could have been prevented if the Ministry had paid closer attention to the development of dark magical practices. Yet the Ministry did not have any records or laws in place to address the creation and use of such objects. This oversight highlights a systemic flaw in the Ministry's approach to magical governance. It fails to address the potential misuse of magic until it is too late. It is important to note that in some cases the Ministry's indifference may not be a result of incompetence, but of a deliberate desire to avoid unnecessary intervention. The Ministry's regulatory body, the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, does not extend to personal artifacts, leaving individual witches and wizards to regulate their own possessions. This hands-off approach, however, is dangerously misguided. If magical objects were more closely monitored, it is possible that Voldemort's rise to power could have been thwarted before he became an unstoppable force. The fact that the Ministry failed to act with urgency in the case of objects like the Elder Wand, the Invisibility Cloak, and Horcruxes points to a larger issue of negligence within the magical world. Number 17. Magical diseases and epidemics. In the wizarding world, magic is a force that shapes lives, provides comforts, and is even used to heal. However, there is a glaring gap in the Ministry of Magic's management when it comes to the regulation of magical illnesses and epidemics. While magical diseases such as dragon pox and lycanthropy are mentioned throughout the Harry Potter series, the lack of a systematic, centralized response to these threats reveals a dangerous neglect within the Ministry as policies leaving both the magical community and the medical profession vulnerable to the unexpected. One particularly notable disease is dragon pox, an ailment that causes high fever, green spots, and often severe complications, including delirium. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, it is mentioned briefly when Harry learns that his friend Ron Weasley had contracted the disease as a child, causing him to endure a great deal of pain and weakness. It's a reminder of how dragonpox, though often treated in its mild form, can still be a devastating illness. However, the magical community seems far too casual about its potential risks. The absence of any clear response from the Ministry when it comes to such diseases suggests a system that is disorganized, reactionary, and entirely unprepared to deal with outbreaks. While the wizarding world relies on St. Mungo's Hospital for magical maladies and injuries, this renowned institution is a reactive rather than proactive force. The hospital, despite its history and importance, functions under an archaic system. Its primary role is to treat injuries and ailments that have already occurred, rather than preventing or containing them. This leaves the magical community wide open to outbreaks of dangerous diseases, especially those that spread through magical means. It's a troubling oversight, one that illustrates how the Ministry of Magic has failed to address the long-term health needs of its citizens. In fact, the magical world lacks the equivalent of a public health department or an agency with the authority and responsibility to monitor and control magical diseases before they spread beyond manageable limits. Take lycanthropy, for example, a curse that turns its victims into werewolves. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, we learn that Remus Lupin, a beloved character and one of Harry's mentors, suffers from this condition. While the wizarding world does have a cure in the form of the wolfsbane potion, which helps lycanthropes retain their human mind during their transformations, there is no real effort from the Ministry to address the societal and medical aspects of lycanthropy comprehensively. The Ministry is quick to marginalize and even ostracize those affected by the disease, as seen with the treatment of Lupin. While the wolfsbane potion is a tremendous help, the stigma surrounding lycanthropy is never fully confronted or addressed by the governing authorities. The Ministry's response to lycanthropy is not one of care or proper regulation, but of avoidance and silence. There is no centralized office dedicated to the management and treatment of lycanthropy, and as such, the disease remains a source of social tension, fear, and discrimination. The notion that magical diseases are a problem that should simply be dealt with individually rather than as part of a larger systemic approach is evident in the absence of any clear response to the effects of magical spells and curses. The magical world has a plethora of dangerous spells and curses, many of which are not only harmful to the body but also have long-term effects on the mind. Take the Cruciatus curse, for example. This torturous spell causes immense pain, and it is implied in the Harry Potter series that prolonged exposure can cause permanent psychological damage. Yet despite the known dangers, the Ministry does little to regulate or monitor those who have been subjected to such curses. There is no government institution responsible for monitoring the effects of dark magic on individuals, leaving survivors of such spells to fend for themselves. This lack of support not only deepens the suffering of the victims, but also reveals the Ministry's fundamental failure to protect its citizens from the lasting consequences of magical violence. The situation becomes even more evident when considering the broader risks of magical epidemics. There is little in the way of a proactive health infrastructure. When the Dark Lord, Voldemort, and his followers rise to power in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, and again in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the Ministry, its focus is almost exclusively on battling dark magic. While this is a pressing concern, the magical community's health risks, both magical and physical, continue to be neglected. There are no medical protocols or containment procedures in place for widespread magical illnesses. One could imagine the chaos that would ensue if an epidemic of dragon pox or an outbreak of werewolf transformations occurred simultaneously in the heart of London. The wizarding world has no systems for quarantine or even effective tracking of magical disease outbreaks, and this dangerous oversight speaks volumes about the Ministry's irresponsible attitude toward the health of its citizens. Moreover, the lack of regulation surrounding magical creatures poses additional risks to the public. Magical creatures, while fascinating and often helpful, can also be carriers of diseases. The hippogriff, for example, a magical creature often seen in the Harry Potter series, is dangerous to interact with if one does not approach it correctly. While not an epidemic in itself, the lack of proper understanding and caution surrounding magical creatures and their potential to carry disease makes the Ministry's handling of these creatures even more concerning. The magical world seems to have no system in place for managing these risks, either from the creatures themselves or from the diseases they may carry. Number 18. Curses and forbidden magic in daily life. In the world of magic, there are 3 unforgivable curses: the Avada Kedavra, the Imperious Curse, and the Cruciatus Curse. These dark spells are not just powerful, but are also regarded as the pinnacle of malevolent magic, forbidden to be used under any circumstances. The very notion of casting one of these curses evokes images of pure evil, for they are designed to inflict extreme harm, manipulate, or, in the case of the killing curse, end a life without mercy. The Ministry of Magic, the governing body of the magical community, is charged with upholding the laws that protect its citizens from such dangerous and immoral magic. However, as with many laws in the wizarding world, the enforcement and regulation of these curses have been far from perfect. The Ministry's actions, often selective and driven by political motivations, leave a lot to be desired. One glaring example of this uneven application of the law can be found in the case of Bellatrix Lestrange, a notorious Death Eater who was widely known for her sadistic tendencies. Bellatrix's use of the Cruciatus Curse, a spell that causes unimaginable pain to the victim, became infamous when it was revealed that she had tortured Alice and Frank Longbottom, the parents of Neville Longbottom, into insanity. Despite the gravity of the crime, it wasn't until after the fall of Voldemort that Bellatrix was finally brought to justice. For years she had roamed free, her actions unchallenged by the Ministry, all while she and her fellow Death Eaters continued to wreak havoc on the magical world. The question that lingers is why it took so long for the Ministry to act, and how many other instances of dark magic went unpunished in the same period. What makes Bellatrix's case particularly concerning is that she was not the only one who committed such heinous acts, and her delayed punishment is not unique. There are numerous instances in the wizarding world where dark magic was used in everyday life, yet the Ministry either turned a blind eye or failed to pursue justice until it became politically advantageous to do so. For example, the case of Barty Crouch Jr. is another disturbing example. Crouch Jr., who had been involved in the torturing and subsequent murder of several wizards, was sentenced to life in Azkaban. However, his story is one of many that highlights the inconsistency of magical law enforcement. He was the son of a high-ranking Ministry official, which raises the uncomfortable question of whether his fate would have been different had he not been caught at the right moment. The Ministry's selective response to dark magic isn't restricted to just the unforgivable curses. The treatment of magical creatures, the use of dangerous potions, and the regulation of dangerous magical artifacts have all been influenced by similar inconsistencies. For example, the treatment of werewolves in the wizarding community is another area where the Ministry's regulations are heavily flawed. Werewolves, particularly during their transformations, are often seen as threats, yet there is little regulation or support for them when they are not in their wolf form. The Ministry's policies on werewolves, like those on dark magic, are more about political convenience than actually ensuring the safety of its citizens. It's a system that is quick to punish the lowly or the powerless, but less inclined to take action when powerful wizards or well-connected individuals are involved. The lack of accountability within the ministry is perhaps most evident during the First and Second Wizarding Wars. During both conflicts, dark magic flourished under the guise of a righteous cause, with many of Voldemort's followers using these curses to terrorize both the magical and Muggle communities. The Ministry's failure to effectively regulate or prevent the spread of dark magic during this time was a direct result of its own incompetence and corruption. For years, the Ministry hesitated to acknowledge the severity of the threat posed by Voldemort and his followers, even after countless deaths and atrocities committed with the unforgivable curses. The Ministry seemed more concerned with maintaining the status quo than actually facing the danger head-on. It wasn't until the return of Voldemort and the subsequent battles that the Ministry finally began to address the growing use of these curses more seriously. However, by then it was already too late. The damage had been done, and many families had been left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. One of the most troubling aspects of the Ministry's handling of dark magic is the tendency to view it through a lens of political power. The decision to bring individuals to justice, or to let them slip through the cracks, often had more to do with who they were and their status in society than the severity of their crimes. This is evident in the case of Lucius Malfoy, who was a prominent figure in the Death Eater ranks. Malfoy's association with Voldemort and his use of dark magic were well known, yet he was not held accountable for his actions until the very end of the war. His wealth, his family, standing, and his connections in the Ministry allowed him to evade serious repercussions for his crimes. The question that arises is whether the Ministry ever truly intended to hold Malfoy or others like him accountable, or if they simply waited for the political tides to shift in their favor before acting. The issue of selective enforcement becomes even more apparent when we consider the implications for ordinary witches and wizards. For those without power or influence, the consequences of using dark magic were far more immediate and severe. A simple curse could lead to a lifetime of imprisonment in Azkaban, while those who were connected to the right people could escape with little more than a slap on the wrist. The difference in how these laws were applied has had a profound impact on the magical community, creating a divide between the elite and the rest of society. It's a reminder that in a world governed by magic, as in our own, power and influence often determine who is punished and who is allowed to walk free. This inequality is not just a matter of who gets punished, but also of who is given the chance to rehabilitate or redeem themselves. Many dark wizards, such as Severus Snape, were able to prove their loyalty to the Order of the Phoenix and ultimately turn their lives around. However, this was not always the case, and many others were simply left to rot in prison, forgotten by the system that failed to protect them in the first place. Snape's story is particularly poignant because, while he was a known Death Eater, his eventual sacrifice for the greater good was largely overlooked by the Ministry. In a sense, Snape represents the tragedy of those who are given no second chances because of the rigid and often unjust system of magical law enforcement. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement, which oversees the investigation and prosecution of dark magic, is often criticized for its bureaucratic inefficiency. With so many cases of dark magic going unresolved or being handled poorly, the Ministry ability to maintain any semblance of control over the use of magic is seriously called into question. The question remains, how many dark magic cases have simply slipped through the cracks, and how many innocent people have been left to suffer as a result? In many ways, the Ministry's failures in regulating dark magic are a reflection of the larger problems within the magical world, problems of corruption, power, and inequality that continue to affect the lives of witches and wizards even long after Voldemort's defeat. The truth is that in the wizarding world, the use of dark magic is as much about power and control as it is about actual magic. The Ministry's handling of curses like the unforgivable curses is a reflection of the complex and often corrupt nature of magical law enforcement. While the rules are clear, the enforcement is anything but, leaving many to wonder whether the Ministry truly has the will to regulate magic or whether it's just another tool for those in power to manipulate the system to their advantage. The legacy of dark magic in the wizarding world is not just about the curses themselves, but about the system that allowed them to flourish for so long. Until that system changes, the spectre of dark magic will always linger, waiting to be unleashed once again. Number 19, Hogwarts Curriculum Oversight. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, the prestigious institution that shaped many generations of wizards and witches, had, by all accounts, been operating with a significant degree of autonomy. This autonomy extended far beyond what would be considered normal for a school in any other setting, magical or otherwise. One of the most glaring aspects of this autonomy was the complete absence of comprehensive oversight from the Ministry of Magic concerning the school curriculum, staff qualifications, and teaching practices. Though the Ministry of Magic was responsible for regulating most aspects of the magical world, from the regulation of magical creatures to enforcing the laws on the use of magic, it showed little to no interest in intervening in Hogwarts' internal workings. There was no central system for certifying teachers or for ensuring that the curriculum was up to a certain standard. In the magical world, this lack of oversight is even more alarming, given the dangers that magical knowledge and skills could present if wielded improperly. The Ministry, in essence, left the school to run itself. Take, for example, Remus Lupin, one of the most beloved Defense Against the Dark Arts professors in Hogwarts history. Despite his skill and experience, Lupin had a deeply personal issue that could have compromised his ability to teach. Lupin was a werewolf, a condition that, when discovered by the students, could have led to panic and possible disciplinary actions. However, Lupin's abilities as a teacher were unquestioned, and his methods proved effective in the classroom. Yet the Ministry had no protocol for determining if he was fit for teaching such a sensitive subject. Instead, it took a personal incident, his condition being revealed to the public, for the Ministry to take action. Instead of developing a policy or system to handle such matters ahead of time, they reacted in an ad hoc manner, dismissing Lupin when his secret was discovered, effectively failing to address the issue in a professional way. This lack of regulation extended to other areas as well. Severus Snape, another Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, had a dark and complicated past. Once a Death Eater, Snape was permitted to take on the role of teacher without any formal scrutiny from the Ministry. He was an extremely talented wizard, of course, but his past allegiance to Voldemort was a matter that to many should have raised questions about his suitability for teaching impressionable students. Yet the Ministry did nothing to ensure that Snape's character was assessed before he was given a position of such responsibility. There was no public record of checks or balances to confirm his qualifications or motivations. In the world of magic, where spells could be used to harm or even kill, the lack of scrutiny was deeply troubling. The Ministry of Magic, instead of stepping in to regulate such situations, only intervened when it suited their political or ideological needs. Dolores Umbridge is the prime example of the Ministry as interference in Hogwarts affairs. When the Ministry sought to install someone loyal to their cause at the school, Umbridge, a Ministry official, was appointed as the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, despite her lack of practical magical knowledge. Rather than teaching her students anything of real value, Umbridge's tenure was marked by cruelty and ineffectiveness as she enforced the Ministry's political agenda through fear and punishment. Her appointment was not a decision based on expertise, but rather a move to cement control over the school. The Ministry, in its attempt to gain control over the school's curriculum, did so in the most heavy-handed, authoritarian way imaginable. One might think that the Ministry would have policies in place to ensure that every professor was qualified, that their methods were appropriate, and that their students were learning the necessary skills to function in the magical world. Instead, Hogwarts operated largely outside any formal system of accreditation or review. This lack of oversight became even more evident when looking at the various magical subjects taught at the school. Potions, for example, was a highly specialized and potentially dangerous field of study, yet there was no requirement for a teacher to undergo any specific checks or certification. While many students respected Severus Snape's proficiency in potions, his teaching methods were often less about imparting knowledge and more about instilling fear in his students. This raises the question, if the Ministry truly cared about the safety and education of young witches and wizards, why did they allow such unregulated teaching methods to persist? Furthermore, there was the issue of magical creatures. Care of magical creatures taught by Hagrid was another subject that fell under the radar of the Ministry's scrutiny. While Hagrid was undoubtedly a kind-hearted and passionate teacher, his knowledge of magical creatures was at times questionable. He was known to introduce his students to dangerous creatures like the blast-ended Scroots without proper regard for their safety. Yet again, the Ministry did not step in to regulate the content or the methods of teaching in this subject. There was no oversight from a governmental body ensuring that Hagrid's lessons were suitable or safe. It was clear that the Ministry's failure to regulate magical education in any meaningful way had left Hogwarts to its own devices. The dangerous consequences of this lack of oversight became apparent during the Tri-Wizard tournament, where students were exposed to life-threatening situations in the name of tradition and competition. The Ministry, rather than focusing on the potential risks of such an event, allowed the tournament to take place despite the many dangers involved. When Harry Potter and Cedric Diggory were thrust into the tournament, they were subjected to magical challenges that could have easily resulted in death. Again, the Ministry did nothing to ensure that the school's activities were appropriately monitored or that proper safety measures were in place. Even the magical exams, such as the OWLs and NEWTs, which were meant to assess the abilities of students in various magical fields, lacked any real standardization or fairness. There was no national system for assessing the qualifications of professors or determining whether their teaching methods were up to standard. The curriculum was left to each individual professor who could teach as they saw fit. This lack of a centralized system for certifying teachers and regulating education in magical schools created an environment where students could graduate with a significant lack of knowledge, or worse, with dangerous misconceptions about magic. The ministry's lack of concern about Hogwarts' curriculum and its faculty ultimately points to a deeper problem, a system that was more concerned with maintaining control and power rather than ensuring the safety and education of young witches and wizards. Their response to crises such as Umbridge, Heir's appointment, or the Tri-Wizard tournament was always reactive, not proactive. They only acted when things had already gone terribly wrong, often exacerbating the situation rather than preventing it. One could argue that this was a deliberate tactic by the ministry to keep Hogwarts under their thumb, with the teachers and headmaster allowed a great deal of freedom so long as they did not challenge the ministry's authority. The decision to only intervene when it suited them allowed the ministry to maintain a hands-off approach in most situations while still ensuring that Hogwarts would be aligned with their political objectives when necessary. In conclusion, the absence of regulation over Hogwarts' curriculum, the lack of oversight of its teachers and the ministry's failure to step in until it was too late reveals a deeply flawed system. Hogwarts, as the leading magical institution in the country, should have been subject to the same standards and oversight as any other school. The ministry's reluctance to institute meaningful checks and balances created an environment where dangerous practices and individuals were allowed to flourish unchecked. It was only when the situation became dire that the ministry intervened, often too late to make a meaningful difference. The consequences of this lack of oversight were seen time and again, from the dangerous creatures introduced in care of magical creatures to the political manipulation by Dolores Umbridge. In the end, Hogwarts remained a place where magical education was both a privilege and a gamble, with no guarantee that the next generation of witches and wizards would emerge properly prepared for the challenges of the magical world. Number 20. Memory charms and mind manipulation. The magic of memory manipulation is a fascinating and at times deeply unsettling concept within J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter universe. Among the many enchantments and spells that inhabit the wizarding world, one of the most powerful and potentially dangerous is the Obliviate spell, which erases memories. What makes this spell particularly alarming is not just its ability to alter personal recollections, but the sheer frequency with which it is used, often with no regard for the ethical or legal implications. While the Ministry of Magic, a highly bureaucratic and at times inefficient institution, regulates numerous aspects of magical society, the use of memory-modifying spells remains largely unchecked. One of the most notable instances of memory manipulation is found in the work of Gilderoy Lockhart, the celebrated yet deeply flawed wizard who, at the height of his fame, appeared to be the epitome of magical prowess. In reality, his accomplishments were fabricated, and his success was built upon the stolen stories of true heroes. What's troubling is that Lockhart regularly used Obliviate to erase the memories of those whose feats he claimed as his own. He didn't just erase the memories of his victims, but stole their experiences, rendering them helpless, while he basked in the glory. In the Chamber of Secrets, when Harry and Ron discover the truth about Lockhart, they find that his career was sustained by erasing the memories of others. This chilling practice of erasing a person's memory and assuming their identity raises profound questions about the ethics of memory manipulation. Why wasn't he held accountable for such an egregious abuse of power? However, it is not just charismatic charlatans like Lockhart who misuse Obliviate. The Ministry of Magic itself, under the guise of protecting the wizarding world from Muggle interference, regularly employs the spell to conceal the existence of magic. The Muggle-worthy Excuse Committee is a prime example of this covert manipulation. Their job is to make sure that any Muggle who might accidentally witness magic or encounter magical creatures forgets what they saw. In these cases, Obliviate is wielded as a tool of secrecy, and while the intention is to maintain the safety and secrecy of the magical community, it begs the question, is it ethical to erase the memories of innocent Muggles for the greater good? What impact does this have on their sense of reality or their autonomy? The spell effectively robs them of the ability to make informed decisions about their experiences, as though their memories are disposable. The extent to which Obliviate is used raises significant concerns about the ability to manipulate personal identities. The idea that a single spell can erase years of a person's memories, rendering them a shadow of their former selves, is terrifying. It is especially disconcerting when we consider the implications for those who may not even be aware of the spell's effect. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, when the quartet is preparing to leave the Quidditch World Cup camp after the Death Eater attack, they are warned by Arthur Weasley about the necessity of using Obliviate on Muggles who might have witnessed the chaos. The Ministry's repeated use of this spell to cover up magical accidents exposes the lack of concern for the individual's agency in the magical world. Muggles, whose entire lives are untouched by the supernatural, are left to deal with the erasure of their most recent memories, often without understanding why their reality was altered. In some cases, even wizards are subject to similar manipulation, their memories altered to suit political or personal agendas. This raises a crucial point about the Ministry of Magic's failure to regulate the use of Obliviate. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, we see the impact of Obliviate in a much darker context when it comes to the lives of those who are caught up in the fight against Voldemort. Memories are erased for a variety of reasons, whether to protect someone's safety or to conceal information from falling into the wrong hands. However, as Dumbledore warns Harry in one of their conversations, the erasure of memories does not simply remove the knowledge of an event, it can fundamentally alter a person's perception of themselves and the world around them. This ethical dilemma is compounded by the Ministry's apparent indifference to the potential long-term effects of such magical manipulation. For instance, consider the case of Percy Weasley, whose intense loyalty to the Ministry leads him to disregard the ethical concerns surrounding Obliviate. When Percy joins the Ministry of Magic, he becomes part of an institution that not only hides the truth from the public, but also uses memory manipulation as a tool of control. Percy's personal history, from his estrangement from his family to his eventual return, serves as a reminder of how memory and loyalty can be manipulated for political gain. His personal struggles are not so much a result of magical intervention, but rather the Ministry's ability to suppress and control information, keeping the truth hidden from both its employees and the general public. In contrast, Harry, Ron, and Hermione, who are frequently exposed to the spell's effects, represent a more nuanced perspective on the ethical use of Obliviate. While they often use the spell for harmless purposes, such as when Hermione uses it to erase the memories of the waiter who overheard their conversation in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. They are keenly aware of the dangers posed by such powerful magic. For them, the spell is an unfortunate necessity in a world where secrecy is paramount to survival. However, even as they wield it, they are keenly aware of the potential consequences of altering someone's memories, and they never use it lightly. The power of Obliviate extends beyond the immediate removal of memories. It raises questions about identity, autonomy, and the right to control his own experiences. The inability to retain memories of key moments in one's life can result in an existential crisis, as one's sense of self is irrevocably tied to the memories they carry. In the magical world, however, this power is not only available to those who are skilled in magic, but also to those in positions of authority. This dynamic creates an environment where those in power can manipulate history and memory to suit their purposes, effectively rewriting reality to maintain control. The Ministry's failure to track the use of Obliviate and hold individuals accountable for its misuse highlights the inherent dangers of unregulated magic in the wizarding world. The consequences of Obliviate also reach beyond personal memory loss. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, the Ministry's refusal to acknowledge the return of Voldemort and their manipulation of the public as memories regarding the events at the Triwizard Tournament reveal a broader use of memory-altering magic for political purposes. The Ministry not only distorts the truth, but also ensures that the public remains ignorant, allowing those in power to maintain their grip on the wizarding community. The widespread use of Obliviate in such contexts highlights the Ministry's disregard for transparency and accountability, reinforcing the dangers of allowing powerful magic to be used for political and personal gain. What is most troubling about the Ministry's lax regulation of Obliviate is that it is not just an issue of memory loss, but an issue of control. The very nature of memory manipulation is that it allows those in power to control how individuals perceive their past, and by extension, their identity. It is a subtle form of coercion, a way of shaping the narrative to suit the needs of those in charge. The consequences of such power are far-reaching, not just for the individuals whose memories are altered, but for society as a whole, as it undermines the foundation of truth and personal agency. In conclusion, the use of Obliviate in the Harry Potter series is a powerful metaphor for the dangers of unchecked power and the manipulation of memory. While the spell may seem like a simple tool for maintaining secrecy, its implications are far more profound. The Ministry's failure to regulate its use highlights the darker side of the magical world, where the very fabric of reality can be altered by those who control the magic. In a world where memory is so easily erased, the question remains, how much of our identity is truly ours to keep? Number 21. Mental health in the wizarding world. In the magical world of Harry Potter, where young wizards face extraordinary dangers, the idea of psychological support for these adolescents is conspicuously absent. For a society where curses, dark magic, and even death are regular threats, it is striking that there seems to be no real structure for addressing the mental health of its citizens. This lack of attention to the psychological well-being of wizards and witches is perhaps most glaring when looking at the experiences of Harry Potter himself, whose journey is marked by trauma, loss, and a constant state of peril. Yet despite the emotional toll this takes on him, no one in the magical community, be it at Hogwarts, within the Ministry of Magic, or even among the healers at St. Mungo's, appears to offer him the professional psychological support he so clearly needs. Throughout the series, Harry faces traumatic events that would leave lasting scars on anyone. The first major incident occurs when he witnesses the murder of Cedric Diggory at the hands of Lord Voldemort. This moment is more than just a shock, it is an experience of raw trauma. The young wizard, no older than 14 at the time, has just seen a fellow student killed in front of him, and the murderer is none other than the dark wizard who had been responsible for the deaths of Harry, his parents. This event, a moment of horrifying clarity, marks a turning point for Harry. Yet after the ordeal, there is no mention of any kind of psychological intervention or even a space where Harry might process what he has witnessed. In the aftermath of Cedric's death, Harry is left to grapple with his grief and fear alone. His emotional state deteriorates, and the traumatic experience has a profound effect on his behavior. Yet the response from the wizarding world is underwhelming. Harry is told to, quote, 35, and is left to deal with his nightmares and the weight of his guilt in isolation. The one time he receives some guidance is through a conversation with Dumbledore, who provides words of wisdom but not the tangible help Harry needs. There is no mention of professional counselors, healers, specializing in mental health, or even a support group for young wizards traumatized by the dangers of their world. At Hogwarts, the lack of psychological care is equally glaring. The school, while rich in magical education and diverse subjects, seems completely ill-equipped to handle the emotional and psychological needs of its students. The professors are experts in their respective fields, but none of them, not even the kind and nurturing Madame Pomfrey, appear to have any training in mental health care. The idea that students, especially those like Harry, who face unimaginable danger, might need someone to talk to, someone trained in helping them process their fears and trauma, never arises. Instead, students are left to deal with their own struggles. Harry himself, for all his bravery and resilience, is never offered a place where he can express his pain in a healthy professional setting. This neglect of psychological care is not confined to Harry alone. The wizarding world seems to expect young witches and wizards to simply accept the hardships they face and move forward. For example, the trauma of losing family members is often brushed aside. Take Hermione Granger, whose parents, though not murdered, are wiped from her memory during the events of the battle at Hogwarts. The emotional impact of that action is barely discussed. In the wizarding world, where magical solutions are regularly applied to problems, there seems to be no magical remedy for the human need to heal emotionally. In the absence of psychological support, wizards seem to turn to each other, or sometimes to their own internal coping mechanisms, to deal with their pain. In Harry's case, he frequently relies on the support of his close friends, Ron and Hermione, but this is far from an ideal solution. While friendship can be comforting, it is not a substitute for professional help. The lack of any formal structure for psychological support for young wizards is a stark oversight, one that leaves Harry and his peers vulnerable to the long-term effects of their trauma. Even the healers at St. Mungo's, the magical hospital that is equipped to deal with physical ailments, do not seem to have a framework for treating mental health issues. When Harry is struck with the Cruciatus curse in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, the physical pain is immediate and intense, but the psychological toll of the experience is just as severe. The curse, which induces excruciating pain, is not just a physical attack, it is an assault on the mind. Harry is tortured not only by the sensation of burning pain, but by the haunting memories of the experience. Yet, once he is physically healed, there is no mention of his emotional recovery. No one suggests that Harry might need help dealing with the aftermath of his trauma, even though the psychological scars of torture are just as important as the physical ones. This theme of psychological neglect is pervasive throughout the entire series. Even when more direct exposure to danger is faced, such as when Harry is forced to confront his greatest fears in the form of the Dementors, there is no structured psychological response. Harry's emotional state is left to fester with little more than well-meaning but inadequate interventions. Dumbledore does his best, of course, offering Harry guidance, but his role is more that of a mentor and a leader, not a trained counselor. Even when Harry battles his fears, as in his confrontation with the Boggart, there is no institutionalized effort to help him unpack the trauma that lies beneath those fears. Harry's demons, both literal and metaphorical, are left to him to face alone, with no safe place to explore the emotional wreckage caused by a lifetime of perilous experiences. This neglect extends beyond just Harry and his friends. The entire wizarding world seems to operate under the assumption that the psychological well-being of its citizens is unimportant, or at the very least, not worth the investment. The Ministry of Magic, an institution that oversees all aspects of magical society, does not address the mental health crisis among witches and wizards, nor does it acknowledge the long-term consequences of trauma caused by dark magic and dark wizards. Even in the aftermath of the Second Wizarding War, there is no mention of providing psychological care to those who have survived the horrors of the conflict. It seems that the magical world simply does not recognize the need for mental health services in the same way it does for physical health services. The series, in many ways, reflects the real-world struggles surrounding mental health, just as the wizarding world neglects the emotional needs of its citizens. Our society too often overlooks the importance of mental health support, particularly for those who have faced trauma. The absence of psychological care in Harry Potter's world is a significant flaw that is never addressed, yet its implications are profound. The emotional scars borne by Harry and his friends are never fully explored or treated, leaving them to carry these burdens through their lives. The neglect of mental health support is perhaps most evident when one compares the magical world, this treatment of physical injury, with its disregard for psychological harm. Healers are experts in treating magical wounds, poisons, and curses, but there is no mention of specialists who focus on the mind. In a world where magical maladies abound, it is bewildering that the emotional and psychological well-being of individuals is left to chance. At its core, the Harry Potter series is about the battle between good and evil, but it is also about the very human experience of coping with loss, fear, and trauma. Yet in a world that is so deeply affected by the dark forces of magic, the idea that its citizens should cope with their pain without professional help seems like a grave oversight. The magical world might be rich in spells, potions, and enchantments, but it lacks the one thing that Harry and his friends need most: the ability to heal from within. Number 22. Wand licensing and weapon control. In the magical world of Harry Potter, wands are far more than mere tools for casting spells. They are instruments of immense power, capable of great destruction, manipulation, and control. Yet despite their potential for harm, the Ministry of Magic, the governing body of the wizarding world, has never imposed any significant regulations or licensing systems for their use. This lack of oversight raises important questions about the nature of magical weapons, the responsibilities of their wielders, and the potential consequences of such unchecked power. When young witches and wizards receive their first wands at the age of 11, no one examines their suitability for handling such a powerful tool. Wands are simply handed out at Ollivander's, the renowned wand shop in Diagon Alley, where the only real requirement is that the wand chooses its owner. The idea that a child could walk out with an object capable of murder, coercion, or manipulation seems extraordinary, especially when compared to the regulation of weaponry in the Muggle world, where firearms and knives are heavily restricted. In the magical world, however, a wand is treated as an almost inconsequential object. As long as it is purchased from a reputable vendor, the ministry does not intervene in how it is used or who uses it. The consequences of this lack of oversight are not immediately apparent to the general public, but there are hints throughout the series of the dangers that arise from such unregulated power. Take, for instance, the character of Draco Malfoy, a student at Hogwarts who, despite his relatively young age, possesses a wand capable of casting deadly curses. While Draco is not depicted as particularly dangerous in the beginning, his association with dark magic becomes clearer as the story progresses, especially when he starts working with Death Eaters. The fact that Draco, a mere adolescent, is able to wield such destructive power with little to no oversight speaks volumes about the lack of control in the magical world. Moreover, wands are not just tools of magic, they are, in essence, weapons. They can kill, maim, and bend the will of others. The unforgivable curses, a trio of spells that are designed for murder, torture, and mind control, can be cast with ease by anyone who has learned the incantations. The killing curse, for example, is famously cast by Lord Voldemort to take the life of Harry, his parents, and later by Bellatrix Lestrange and other Death Eaters. Yet despite their immense power, there is no system in place to prevent young, impulsive wizards from casting such spells. Consider the case of Harry himself. While he is depicted as a well-meaning, brave hero, Harry's early years at Hogwarts reveal how little control there is over the use of magic. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Harry unknowingly casts a spell on Dudley, his cousin, when he makes his first accidental use of magic during a stressful moment. It is a small example, but it highlights the randomness of magical accidents in the absence of proper oversight. If Harry's wand had been checked before being handed to him, perhaps such incidents could have been avoided or at least mitigated, but instead magic is given freely to children who may not fully understand its weight or consequences. This lack of regulation is further exemplified by the way students are allowed to carry wands with them at all times. While it is certainly convenient for a wizard to have their wand on hand, the fact that they can carry it without restriction, even in places like the Forbidden Forest or in Muggle areas, speaks to the casual way in which wands are treated. There is no security screening, no checks to ensure that the person wielding the wand is fit to do so. In contrast, Muggle society has strict rules surrounding the carrying of weapons. Imagine a society where children, like Harry, are allowed to carry firearms without any oversight. It would be unimaginable in the real world, but in the magical world, it is the norm. Even the spells that are taught at Hogwarts are not regulated to the degree they should be. While Professor Flitwick, for example, teaches his students harmless charms in their early years, these spells are by no means the most dangerous magic a wizard can wield. As students progress through their studies, they learn increasingly potent spells with no significant checks on who they are learning them from or how they are using them. This is especially concerning when considering the potential for students like Draco or even Harry to use these spells for darker purposes. The Ministry's response to such concerns seems inadequate at best. The fact that there is no formal licensing or registration system for magical weapons, wands in particular, speaks to a larger problem of oversight within the Ministry of Magic. While the Ministry has created laws for things like the use of magic in front of Muggles, they have never attempted to implement a system to regulate the most fundamental weapon in a wizard, its arsenal, the wand. In a world where the dark arts continue to be a pressing concern, this lack of regulation is a glaring weakness. One notable example of this lack of oversight is the use of the Dark Mark, a magical symbol that signals the presence of Death Eaters. The Dark Mark, when cast, is a sign of Voldemort's return to power and the reign of terror that follows in his wake. Yet despite its clear association with dark magic, there is no attempt by the Ministry to regulate the use of such symbols or spells. In a world where wands are so easily accessible, it is not difficult to imagine how young wizards could be drawn into using such dark magic for their own purposes, whether out of curiosity, peer pressure, or malice. The absence of proper licensing or regulation is not limited to the students at Hogwarts. Adult witches and wizards, too, have free rein over their magical abilities. Consider the character of Mad-Eye Moody, an experienced aura who carries a variety of magical weapons, including a wand that can perform highly advanced and dangerous spells. While Moody is clearly a highly responsible wizard, there is no formal process by which his use of magic is monitored. His actions while in service to the Ministry are largely unchecked. The same can be said for other wizards, including auras and members of the Order of the Phoenix, who regularly engage in dangerous missions. There is no real oversight to ensure that these powerful individuals are using their wands responsibly and not abusing their magic for personal gain. This brings us back to the central question: why hasn't the Ministry of Magic put in place more rigid controls? One possibility is that the Ministry has a deep-seated belief in the autonomy of its citizens and their right to wield magic as they see fit. Magic, after all, is intrinsic to a wizard, its identity, and many would argue that any restrictions on the use of magic would be a direct infringement on personal freedoms. But this stance seems dangerously naive, especially when one considers the many ways in which magic can be used for harm. Ultimately, the lack of regulation over wands and their use in the magical world underscores a profound oversight within the Ministry of Magic. Wands are, without question, magical weapons capable of causing immense destruction. Yet, for all their power, they are subject to no real system of control or oversight. This flaw in the system speaks to a larger issue within the wizarding world, the tendency to underestimate the dangers of magic and the need for more stringent regulation. Until the Ministry acknowledges the true potential for harm that wands represent, the magical world will continue to live in a state of recklessness where anyone, regardless of age, experience, or intent, can wield immense power without any real checks or consequences. Number 23, dueling and lack of official rules. In the world of Harry Potter, magic is boundless, and the ability to duel is one of the most fundamental aspects of a wizard's education and self-defense. From the earliest days at Hogwarts, students are taught to defend themselves against the dangers lurking in the wizarding world. But what stands out and what remains a striking anomaly throughout J.K. Rowling's series is the absence of any formal regulation or clear set of rules governing these magical duels. While various forms of magical combat are common in the wizarding world, whether in the schools, corridors, or at the highest levels of power, there are no universal guidelines to oversee how they should be conducted, nor is there an organized structure in place to prevent abuses. Instead, duels happen on a whim, sometimes with catastrophic results, and the governing bodies of the magical world seem either indifferent or ill-equipped to address the issue. One of the most notable and perhaps perplexing aspects of these duels is their apparent lack of oversight. At Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, students are encouraged to duel from a young age, albeit in a controlled environment. The famous dueling club, held in the second year of Harry Potter, his education, was one such example where students were given the opportunity to showcase their magical prowess in front of an audience. However, while the club offered a relatively safe environment for students to engage in duels, it was hardly indicative of any larger, more structured regulation of magical combat. It was more a spectacle of students showing off their skills rather than a meaningful attempt at creating a regulated environment. Despite the presence of such clubs, magical duels continue to happen throughout the series in various contexts, with little to no intervention from the Ministry of Magic. Take, for example, the infamous duel between Draco Malfoy and Harry Potter in the empty classroom during their second year. The two boys, fueled by a long-standing rivalry and their personal animosity, decide to duel after hours. There are no referees, no magical observers, and certainly no official permissions sought from the school staff or the ministry. The duel is raw and unregulated, just two wizards, each with a wand using their magic, in an unsupervised confrontation. This lack of structure in the duel is not an isolated incident. It reflects the overall chaotic nature of magical combat in the wizarding world. The Ministry of Magic, which is responsible for governing the magical community and enforcing the law, appears to be conspicuously absent when it comes to controlling duels. Even in situations where the duels have immense consequences, such as when Albus Dumbledore and Lord Voldemort clash in the Ministry of Magic itself, there is no evidence of any structured legal framework in place to prevent or control the duel. The Ministry, which should ideally be the first line of defense against such destructive magical altercations, seems more concerned with covering up the aftermath than preventing the actual confrontation. After the duel between Dumbledore and Voldemort, the Ministry doesn't step in to enforce any repercussions for such an event. Instead, they simply erase the memory of it from the minds of witnesses, hoping to avoid scandal rather than regulate the use of dangerous magic in public spaces. This negligence becomes even more apparent during the Triwizard Tournament, where duels are not only allowed, but are encouraged as part of the contest. The tournament, a centuries-old event designed to showcase the skills of the most talented young wizards, features a series of magical challenges. One of the most notable events is the duel between Harry Potter and Cedric Diggory in the first task, where both participants are expected to use magic in a highly competitive, though somewhat controlled, setting. Yet despite the controlled environment, the stakes are still high and the risks are far from negligible. The very fact that young wizards are subjected to these dangerous challenges with little real oversight is a testament to the Ministry's failure to enforce any meaningful guidelines around magical combat. Even when it comes to the most dangerous forms of magic, such as the use of the unforgivable curses, there is little indication that the Ministry enforces any sort of consistency when it comes to regulating the boundaries of magical duels. The unforgivable curses are among the most dangerous and destructive spells in the wizarding world, and their use is strictly prohibited. However, they are regularly invoked by dark wizards such as Bellatrix Lestrange and other Death Eaters without consequence in the context of duels. This raises the question: if such dangerous magic can be wielded with impunity during duels, why is there no official structure in place to prevent it from happening? If anything, the Ministry's reaction to these events, consistently weak and often delayed, speaks to the profound lack of seriousness with which they regard the regulation of magical combat. The lack of regulation is further highlighted when considering the nature of magical power itself. In a world where a single spell can kill, maim, or destroy, one would expect that there would be clear restrictions on how and when magic could be used in such confrontations. However, this is not the case. In fact, the entire structure of magical combat in the wizarding world seems to rely on the individual wizard's moral compass and sense of responsibility, rather than any institutional checks or balances. This creates an environment where the powerful are free to wield their magic as they see fit, with little to no fear of reprisal from the governing bodies. The contrast between the potential for chaos in magical duels and the lack of formal oversight is perhaps most striking in the case of Harry Potter himself. Throughout the series, Harry is thrust into several dangerous situations where dueling is necessary for self-preservation. His duel with Voldemort in the graveyard, for instance, is a desperate act of survival, but there is no official oversight or control of the magical forces at play. The absence of any institutional authority to regulate these life-threatening situations highlights the chaotic nature of magic in the wizarding world. This becomes even more concerning when considering the implications of allowing such confrontations to occur without any form of control. The potential for abuse is high, and yet the Ministry of Magic remains largely passive, responding only when the situation escalates beyond their control. The question of why magical duels remain unregulated can be partially answered by looking at the culture of the wizarding world itself. Wizards and witches throughout history have prided themselves on their personal autonomy and magical prowess. The idea of a controlling body overseeing how and when they use their magic may be seen as a direct challenge to their independence. This cultural attitude towards magic is embedded deeply in the collective psyche of the magical community, and it reflects a sense of self-reliance that may be more harmful than empowering. For many, magic is not something to be policed. It is something to be respected and perhaps feared, but never restrained. In many ways, the lack of regulation reflects a larger issue within the Ministry of Magic itself, its reluctance to engage in difficult conversations about the nature of power. The Ministry is content to react to crises as they arise, but it rarely takes proactive steps to prevent them from occurring in the first place. In this way, the failure to regulate magical duels can be seen as a microcosm of the Ministry, its overall approach to governance: reactive, short-sighted, and often ineffective. At the heart of the issue lies the fundamental question of what it means to wield magic responsibly. Without clear regulations or guidelines, duels become a dangerous gamble, a test of personal strength, but also of luck, timing, and circumstance. Those who are skilled in magic are free to engage in combat with little fear of reprisal, and the consequences of their actions are often felt by innocent bystanders. In a world where magic can be both a tool of empowerment and a weapon of destruction, the absence of a clear regulatory framework leaves the wizarding world vulnerable to the dangers of unchecked power. Number 24. Emotion and will-altering spells. The Ministry of Magic has long established a firm set of rules and regulations regarding the use of magic, from the regulation of magical creatures to the precise limits on spells in the wizarding world. However, one area remains startlingly unregulated: the use of spells that directly influence a person's emotions and will. These are the spells that, when used inappropriately, can manipulate, control, and damage the very essence of a person's autonomy, leaving them vulnerable to the will of others. It is a dark area of magic that, while feared by many, goes largely unchecked in both the wizarding world and within the walls of Hogwarts. The most notorious of these spells is the Imperious Curse, one of the unforgivable curses, a dark and dangerous spell that allows the caster to take control of another person's actions. The effects are so severe that the target loses all sense of self, becoming a mere puppet in the hands of the caster. Under the Imperious Curse, a person can be forced to commit acts they would never have done voluntarily, as seen in the case of many Death Eaters who were later revealed to have been under the influence of this curse. However, more subtle and seemingly harmless charms also exist, such as the Charm of Attraction or the Calming Charm. These are not only permitted but commonly used in various settings, from casual social interactions to professional environments, without the slightest regulation. The charm of attraction, which causes an individual to become drawn to another person, can be particularly insidious in its applications. It might seem like an innocent spell used to spark romance or interest, but it can easily be used for manipulation, forcing someone to act on feelings that aren't truly their own. At Hogwarts, students often use such charms in their everyday lives. It is whispered among students that certain members of the Slytherin house, those who have mastered the art of charm work, routinely employ this spell to make their peers more compliant or, at the very least, distracted. The charm's use is not illegal in itself, but its capacity for harm is undeniable. The Calming Charm, another often used spell, is designed to soothe a person who is agitated or angry, promoting a peaceful state of mind. While on the surface this might seem like an entirely beneficial spell, it too holds potential for abuse. A person under the influence of a calming charm may lose the ability to voice concerns, argue, or stand up for themselves. This makes them particularly susceptible to manipulation, as they no longer possess the same level of emotional resilience. At Hogwarts, it's not uncommon for a stressed-out student to receive this spell from a teacher or a friend. But what happens when it is used in situations where emotional clarity is necessary, such as in cases of injustice or disputes? The consequences can be far-reaching and deeply troubling. The lack of any sort of regulatory framework for these types of spells is striking. In a world where even the most mundane magic is subject to oversight, one might expect that the Ministry of Magic would have taken steps to address the regulation of spells that can affect the very core of an individual's being. The absence of such regulation creates an environment ripe for exploitation. Take, for example, the use of such spells on young students at Hogwarts. Professors, especially those with considerable influence like Professor Snape or even Professor Lockhart, wield a significant amount of power over their students, not just in terms of their academic success, but in terms of their emotions and reactions. The potential for these teachers to use subtle spells to influence students' feelings and actions is vast, yet there is little to no accountability. The Ministry of Magic's failure to regulate these emotional and volitional spells becomes even more troubling when considering the potential misuse by adults in positions of authority. Parents can use spells to calm their children or make them more compliant. Employers may use calming or attraction spells to ensure loyalty from their workers. Even within relationships, the use of spells that influence emotions is common, yet rarely questioned. These practices highlight a glaring ethical issue within the wizarding world, one that remains largely ignored despite its obvious implications for individual freedom and personal rights. If such magical influences were to be allowed in Muggle society, they would undoubtedly be considered a violation of basic human rights. Any attempt to control or manipulate someone's emotional state would be seen as a form of psychological abuse, punishable by law. In the wizarding world, however, the concept of emotional manipulation via spells is largely dismissed or regarded with indifference. The magical community seems to operate under a different set of moral guidelines, one in which personal will and autonomy take a back seat to convenience, control, and tradition. Consider the moment in Harry Potter's own life when he is subjected to the Imperious Curse during the Triwizard Tournament. Harry, though strong-willed, finds himself momentarily under the curse, control, forced to perform actions against his better judgment. The experience is terrifying, and though Harry resists it, not every witch or wizard possesses the same strength of will. For some, the Imperious Curse is an invisible prison, trapping them in a world where their thoughts and actions are no longer their own. Yet this powerful curse is just one example of the ways in which magic can manipulate the mind, body, and soul, and it is not the most commonly used. The prevalence of non-unforgivable charms in everyday wizarding life presents an even greater problem. Harry himself notes how easily charms like the calming charm are applied to students, particularly in moments of emotional stress. While on the surface it seems like a helpful intervention, Harry's own experiences with emotional turmoil show how such spells can strip away a person's ability to confront their problems directly. The lack of self-determination that results from such interventions is hardly ever considered by the magical community, who view these charms as merely a tool for smoothing over the rough edges of life. In many ways, the magical community's casual acceptance of these spells speaks to a broader issue within the wizarding world, the failure to acknowledge the potential harm caused by magic when wielded without consideration for the deeper ethical consequences. It is a stark contrast to the more highly regulated forms of magic, such as the dark arts or potion making, which are carefully controlled and scrutinized by the ministry. The contradiction between the regulation of some forms of magic and the complete freedom with which others are used reveals a deep-seated imbalance in the way magic is governed. While some might argue that the absence of regulation is simply a matter of tradition, it's difficult to overlook the consequences this lack of oversight has had on the lives of many within the wizarding world. If the Ministry of Magic is to be considered a responsible governing body, it must begin to take action on the regulation of these emotionally and psychologically manipulative spells. It is not enough to simply turn a blind eye to the potential for harm. by failing to regulate spells that can control or alter a person's emotions and will. The Ministry is opening the door for widespread abuse, particularly among the more powerful members of society. In the end, the Ministry of Magic's reluctance to address the issue of emotional manipulation through magic represents a dangerous oversight in the magical world as legal system. The consequences of this neglect are far-reaching, affecting individuals on a deeply personal level and shaping the very fabric of magical society. Until the Ministry recognizes the need for stricter regulations in this area, the potential for emotional and psychological manipulation will continue to loom large, unchecked and unchallenged. The magic that should bring wonder and joy instead leaves a trail of broken wills, compromised autonomy and manipulation, all beneath the veneer of a system that prides itself on maintaining control. Number 25, Muggle interference. In the world of magic, the Ministry of Magic is supposed to ensure the separation of the magical and non-magical worlds. This division is one of the core principles upon which the very fabric of the Wizarding Society is built. However, despite this official stance, many wizards and witches regularly engage with the Muggle world in ways that seem far from regulated. From magical objects interfering with Muggle lives to spells that alter the memories or very forms of Muggles themselves, the Ministry's claim to protect Muggles from magical interference often falls short of reality. Take, for instance, Arthur Weasley, a wizard whose life is a testament to the blurred lines between the two worlds. A beloved character in the, for quote, 54 series, Arthur's fascination with Muggles and their technology borders on obsession. He frequently casts spells to modify Muggle objects, turning them into magical gadgets or, at the very least, ensuring that they malfunction in the most whimsical of ways. Arthur's conduct, while endearing and harmless in his mind, is a prime example of the larger issue that the Ministry fails to address: the lack of proper oversight on magical interference in the Muggle world. This is not an isolated incident, nor is it unique to Arthur. Many witches and wizards, albeit less openly than Arthur, manipulate the Muggle world, often without any sense of responsibility or accountability. There are numerous incidents where magical interference goes beyond harmless tinkering with Muggle technology. The very existence of magical creatures such as the blast-ended Scroots or hippogriffs poses a constant risk to Muggles, yet the Ministry has little control over how these creatures are used or contained by wizards, especially when they end up in the Muggle world. One can recall the incident during the Triwizard Tournament when Hagrid, a beloved character known for his enthusiasm about magical creatures, takes Harry and Cedric Diggory into the Forbidden Forest to see the blast-ended Scroots. The very idea of a creature like this being allowed to roam in an environment where Muggles could encounter it is a glaring example of the lack of regulation. If Muggles were to see such creatures, they would likely mistake them for something out of a nightmare, and the consequences of such an event would surely be disastrous. But the Ministry's response? Silence. Moreover, the Ministry's lack of accountability for magical intervention in Muggle lives is evidenced in the memory charm that wizards routinely use on Muggles. One of the most blatant violations of Muggle rights is the use of the memory charm, a spell that erases memories. It is used whenever a Muggle comes into contact with something magical that they should not have witnessed. Most notably, the charm is frequently applied by the Obliviators, a division of the Ministry, who are tasked with erasing Muggle memories to prevent them from revealing the magical world to others. Yet the fact that this spell is used so liberally, sometimes with no more than a fleeting thought to the consequences raises the question of whether Muggles have any say in the matter at all. There are countless examples in the series where wizards and witches erase the memories of Muggles without just cause. For instance, in quote 56, when Harry and Ron fly the car to Hogwarts, they accidentally crash into a Muggle's house. The Muggle in question, a woman who witnessed the crash, could easily have gone to the authorities, but instead she is subjected to a memory charm. Her memory is wiped, leaving her confused and oblivious to the fact that a flying car had crashed into her home. The casualness with which the spell is cast, along with the lack of any regulation or oversight, is a glaring example of how the Ministry fails to protect Muggles from unwarranted magical interference. Another instance occurs when the Weasley family visits Diagon Alley, and Arthur's fascination with Muggle artifacts leads to him using a spell to clean a Muggle object. While this action may seem harmless to some, it speaks volumes about how little consideration the wizarding community has for the effect their magic has on the Muggle world. By the time Arthur realizes the full implications of his actions, he has already broken the law by using magic on a Muggle object without authorization. But the Ministry, seemingly uninterested in enforcing its own laws, does little to hold him accountable. Perhaps one of the most disturbing examples of magical interference is the use of Polyjuice Potion. While this potion has many uses, one of its most dangerous applications is the ability to transform a wizard into another person, even a Muggle. In Itatok 58, Barty Crouch Jr., disguised as Mad-Eye Moody, uses Polyjuice Potion to infiltrate Hogwarts and manipulate the events of the Triwizard Tournament. This event showcases not only the vulnerability of the Muggle world to magical intrusion, but also how easily a Muggle's identity can be stolen, their life altered forever, and the Ministry fails to notice until it is too late. Even more disturbing is the reality that the Ministry of Magic does not seem to have a central regulatory body that monitors how often magical spells are used on Muggles. Whether it's a rogue wizard using a simple levitation charm to lift a Muggle's belongings, or a dark wizard casting far more dangerous curses, there is no real oversight in place. The magical law enforcement, despite its vast jurisdiction, often appears distracted by more immediate concerns such as battling dark wizards or investigating magical crimes within the wizarding community. As a result, the Muggle world continues to suffer from the whims of wizards and witches, with little recourse for the victims. The idea of Muggles being powerless in the face of magical interference is a sobering one, especially when one considers the vast number of incidents that occur on a daily basis. The Ministry's lack of accountability for such actions highlights a systemic problem within the magical government, where the focus is often placed on the protection of magical society rather than on the safeguarding of the Muggle population. The lack of an agency or body to oversee magical interactions with Muggles speaks to a broader issue within the magical world, one that continues to be ignored, much to the detriment of both societies. Additionally, the Ministry's role in regulating the magical world's impact on Muggles can be traced back to the very founding of the International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy. This law, designed to prevent wizards from revealing themselves to Muggles, has often been manipulated by the Ministry to suit its own agenda. While the statute was originally meant to protect Muggles from magical creatures and wizards who might cause harm, it has instead been used as a tool to cover up the consequences of magical interference. Rather than fostering an environment of mutual respect, the statute has created a rift between the two worlds, one that has allowed wizards to act with impunity. In fact, the Ministry's consistent failure to regulate magical interference with Muggles speaks to a larger issue, a culture of indifference and elitism within the wizarding community. The Ministry, particularly the higher-ups, seem to view Muggles as beneath them, a view that is reflected in their lack of regard for the harm their magic can cause. This elitism, coupled with a blatant disregard for Muggle lives, makes it clear that the Ministry's claims of protecting Muggles are more rhetoric than reality. The absence of real regulation and oversight leaves the Muggle world vulnerable to magical manipulation and abuse, with no recourse for those affected. Ultimately, the question remains, who is really protecting Muggles from the harm that magic can cause? With no oversight, no regulatory body, and no accountability for the actions of wizards and witches, the Ministry, Tao's claims, ring hollow. The magical world continues to act as though it operates in isolation, but the consequences of its actions are felt far beyond the confines of the wizarding community. Until the Ministry takes its responsibility to protect the Muggle world seriously, magical interference will continue to be a dangerous and unpredictable force, one that remains largely unchecked. Number 26. Storage and destruction of dangerous artifacts. The magical world is rife with dangerous artifacts, from the cursed diary of Tom Riddle to Salazar Slytherin's medallion. These objects, many of them dark and powerful, hold the potential to wreak havoc on the wizarding world. One would assume that the Ministry of Magic, tasked with overseeing all aspects of magical law and order, would have a well-organized system for both storing and neutralizing such perilous items. Yet time and again, these items seem to surface mysteriously in the hands of those who are neither equipped to handle them nor aware of their dark potential. Take, for instance, the case of Tom Riddle's diary. The diary, which served as a vessel for the memory and soul of Voldemort himself, was a dangerous relic that could possess and control its user. It had been carelessly left in a second-hand store where it was bought by Ginny Weasley, a young and unsuspecting student at Hogwarts. The Ministry, despite its many powers and resources, had allowed such a dangerous object to be forgotten, untracked, and easily accessible to anyone who stumbled upon it. It is hard to believe that a magical artifact of such significance could simply slip through the cracks of the Ministry's radar. Then there is the infamous locket of Salazar Slytherin. One of Voldemort's Horcruxes, it carried a fragment of his soul and was a key element in his quest for immortality. After Voldemort's reign of terror, the locket, like many of his other dark artifacts, was discarded and left in a place where only those who knew its importance could retrieve it. The locket passed through many hands before it finally made its way into the possession of Ron Weasley and Harry Potter. Despite its dangerous nature, it was not secured in a vault, nor was there any public record of its whereabouts. It was, in fact, treated with far less care than one would expect for an object with such historical and magical significance. The fact that these objects seem to pop up in unexpected places is not a new phenomenon. The Ministry of Magic, for all its bureaucracy and regulation, seems to lack an effective system for monitoring and securing dangerous magical artifacts. No centralized registry or database exists where the whereabouts and status of such items can be tracked. If such a system were in place, most of the dark artifacts of the past would likely be neutralized before they could cause harm. But instead, the wizarding world operates under a strange and unsettling principle. If it hasn't exploded, don't touch it. This mindset is most evident in the handling of the Deathly Hallows. These three powerful artifacts, the Elder Wand, the Resurrection Stone, and the Invisibility Cloak, were originally created by Death himself, according to the fable told in Norchik, the Tale of the Three Brothers. The Hallows are known for their immense power, and yet they too were allowed to remain largely unregulated. The Elder Wand, perhaps the most dangerous of the three, passed through the hands of numerous wizards and witches, each of them meeting an untimely and often violent end. Its history is a series of murders and betrayals, yet the ministry did little to track its movements or ensure it was properly contained. The fact that the wand remained hidden in the wizarding world for centuries is a testament to the ministry's lack of foresight and proactive measures. Even the very act of destroying dangerous artifacts seems to be left up to chance. Consider the case of the Horcruxes, fragments of Voldemort, soul embedded in objects such as his diary, his locket, and the ring of Marvolo Gaunt. These items were among the most dangerous magical creations in existence, yet the ministry had no system in place to identify or track them. It was not until Harry Potter, Ron Weasley, and Hermione Granger embarked on their perilous journey to destroy Voldemort's Horcruxes that the world truly began to understand the full extent of their power. The ministry, while aware of Voldemort's activities, was oblivious to the dangers posed by the Horcruxes until it was almost too late. The lack of action on the ministry's part is not limited to Voldemort's creations. Throughout the history of the wizarding world, there have been numerous instances of dangerous magical objects being left to their own devices. The cursed vaults at Hogwarts, for example, contained magical artifacts that had been sealed away for their own safety, yet over time, their contents were allowed to be rediscovered. The vault containing the cursed treasure of Salazar Slytherin, which housed the dangerous locket, was only opened because of an accidental chain of events. Had the ministry implemented a better system for securing these vaults, the danger could have been averted long before. This laissez-faire attitude is puzzling, considering the ministry's obsession with regulating other aspects of magical society. From the regulation of magical creatures like house elves and dragons to the strict oversight of magical law enforcement, one would think that dangerous magical objects would be a higher priority. Instead, the ministry's resources are focused on less pressing concerns, leaving the dangerous artifacts of the wizarding world to fend for themselves. This lack of oversight not only endangers the public but also allows dark magic to flourish unchallenged. The situation grows even more troubling when considering the magical protections that exist within the ministry itself. There are numerous wards, charms, and enchantments designed to protect important areas such as Gringotts, the Department of Mysteries, and even the ministry's own vaults. Yet these protections seem to be in place for the purpose of guarding golden magical knowledge rather than protecting the wizarding world from dangerous magical artifacts. Why, one might ask, are the powerful and destructive objects of dark magic not subjected to the same rigorous protections as the ministry's own assets? The reluctance to regulate dangerous magical artifacts might be tied to the ministry fear of stirring up controversy. Magical items such as the Deathly Hallows and the Horcruxes carry significant historical and cultural weight. Interfering with these objects could be seen as an affront to wizarding tradition or a breach of historical integrity. The ministry may be hesitant to intervene, not wanting to risk angering those who believe in the significance of these objects or those who seek to exploit their power for personal gain. But the consequences of this neglect are too severe to ignore. It is clear that a proper system of regulation and containment is necessary to prevent dark artifacts from falling into the wrong hands. The fact that powerful objects like the diary, the locket, and the Elder Wand could so easily be lost, forgotten, or stolen speaks volumes about the lack of foresight and responsibility within the ministry. These items are not merely relics of a bygone age, they are active threats that can cause untold harm to the wizarding world. It is also worth considering the toll that these unregulated objects take on those who encounter them. Harry Potter, Ron Weasley, and Hermione Granger spent countless hours tracking down and destroying Voldemort's Horcruxes, each encounter bringing them closer to death and despair. They were, in many ways, left to shoulder the responsibility that should have fallen to the Ministry of Magic. The burden of dealing with these dangerous objects was thrust upon them, a group of young wizards and witches with no official training or support from the Ministry. The failure of the Ministry to regulate dangerous magical artifacts is one of the most glaring flaws in the wizarding world, is governance. It highlights not only the Ministry's lack of preparedness, but also its failure to evolve with the times. If the wizarding world is to remain safe, it must confront the issue of magical artifact regulation head-on, implementing systems that can track, neutralize, and contain these threats before they spiral out of control. Until such changes are made, the magical world will continue to live by the motto, "If it hasn't exploded, don't touch it." But as history has shown, that approach is only a recipe for disaster. Number 27. Privacy violations through magical means. The magical world of Harry Potter is full of wonders, most of them enhancing the lives of witches and wizards in ways we can hardly imagine. From the spellbinding properties of potions to the power of wands, magic has given magical society the ability to transcend ordinary limits. However, for all the marvels magic offers, there is one deeply unsettling aspect that has been largely overlooked by the Ministry of Magic: the breach of privacy through magical means. The Ministry, which is responsible for overseeing all magical law, has never effectively regulated how magic can infringe on personal privacy, leaving a dangerous gap in their legal framework. In the wizarding world, privacy is a concept that seems to be largely absent. Wizards and witches have access to numerous magical tools that allow them to eavesdrop, spy, and even read minds. Some of these tools, like the Marauder's Map or the Mirror of Erist, are widely known to be potent means of gathering information about others without their knowledge or consent. The Marauder's Map, created by James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew, is perhaps the most famous of these tools. It shows not just the layout of Hogwarts, but also the precise location of every person within the castle, revealing their movements in real time. The map is essentially a tool for spying, one that can bypass any form of magical privacy the castle might attempt to establish. Yet, it was never explicitly outlawed or regulated by the Ministry, leaving it to roam free in the hands of students who may or may not have ethical concerns about using it. Similarly, the Mirror of Erist, which shows the deepest, most desperate desire of one's heart, is another object that reveals something deeply personal without consent. While the mirror does not allow for surveillance in the traditional sense, its ability to peer into a person's innermost emotions makes it an invasion of privacy in its own right. It taps into the secret, hidden parts of a person or psyche, exposing desires that are often far too personal for anyone to witness. Yet, no law exists in the magical world to regulate who can use such a powerful object or to what end. There is no governing body that prevents one from using the mirror of Eristed to manipulate or exploit someone's emotions for personal gain. These examples are just the tip of the iceberg. One of the more insidious forms of magical privacy violation is found in the use of magical spies. The infamous Rita Skeeter, a journalist for the Daily Prophet, takes this concept to a new level. She uses an unregistered animagus form transforming into a beetle to eavesdrop on private conversations and gather information that would otherwise be impossible to obtain. Skeeter is spying is a direct violation of privacy, yet the ministry, despite being aware of her unethical practices, does nothing to regulate her actions or to prevent her from continuing to invade people's lives for the sake of her journalistic career. There is no magical law in place that would punish her for her use of this method, and the lack of regulation allows her to exploit her ability with little consequence. In fact, Rita Skeeter's actions highlight a key issue in the magical community: the total absence of a legal framework surrounding magical privacy. While the Ministry of Magic has laws for other magical issues, such as the regulation of magical creatures and the enforcement of wizarding law, the issue of personal privacy remains untouched. No wizard or witch is protected from the potential misuse of magical tools that could infringe upon their right to privacy. As long as one has access to a magical object or the ability to perform a spell, they can essentially break into anyone's life, read their thoughts, or even manipulate their emotions, all without fear of legal reprisal. This absence of magical privacy laws becomes especially concerning when considering the potential for misuse by malicious individuals. The power to spy on someone's private thoughts, to track their every movement, or to read their most intimate desires could be catastrophic in the wrong hands. A person with ill intent, equipped with the tools available in the wizarding world, could bring about untold harm. For example, a dark wizard could use the Marauder map not only to track their target, Istami's movements, but also to strategize an attack, knowing exactly when and where their target will be at any given time. Meanwhile, the Mirror of Erised could be used to manipulate someone's most vulnerable desires, leading them down dangerous paths of self-deception or despair. And of course, Rita Skeeter's beetle form provides an ideal method for blackmail or public humiliation, as she exposes the private lives of individuals for her own personal gain. Even the magical method of legilimency, the ability to read minds, has the potential for abuse. While legilimency is considered an advanced form of magic, it is no less dangerous in the wrong hands. A skilled legilimens can peer into a person's thoughts, delving into memories and emotions that are meant to remain private. And yet there is no clear law in place to protect witches and wizards from this invasion of their minds. We see the consequences of this lack of regulation when Voldemort uses legilimency on Harry Potter to invade his thoughts, manipulating his emotions and attempting to plant ideas in his head. While Harry is able to fight back, the fact remains that he has no legal protection against this form of mental intrusion. In the case of Rita Skeeter, we also see how the absence of regulation allows for blatant breaches of privacy to go unpunished. When Hermione Granger confronts her about her illegal use of the animagus form, Skeeter reveals that she has evaded punishment simply because the Ministry has no laws regulating her behavior. Even after Hermione and Harry expose her underhanded tactics, Skeeter is allowed to continue her career free from any legal consequences. The lack of regulation in magical privacy is not only frustrating but dangerous, as it empowers individuals like Skeeter to manipulate and exploit others with impunity. The Ministry of Magic's failure to address this gap in the law is a troubling oversight. In a world where magic can be used to violate privacy in so many ways, it is incredibly concerning that no regulations exist to protect individuals from such intrusions. Whether through magical artifacts like the Marauder, Map, or the Mirror of Erised, or through the use of spies and legilimency, the magical community is rife with the potential for privacy violations. And without any form of oversight or regulation, the safety and dignity of witches and wizards remain in jeopardy. This failure to address magical privacy is not just a minor oversight, it is a critical flaw in the magical legal system. The Ministry must recognize the dangers posed by these magical tools and put in place laws that safeguard the personal privacy of witches and wizards. Until that happens, the magical world will remain a place where anyone can invade another, privacy with ease, and where the consequences for such violations remain non-existent.